I am the greatest.
I wish I was 50 years younger and I'd kick your ass.
You won't do shit. Just stick and move. And waking you up and saying, now stick and move. Keep your hands up.
Welcome to a new episode of the Stick and Move podcast. I'm your host, Trey, and today I'm starting a new series called the Never Forget series, where I talk about the old legends. Today I'm talking about Sonny Liston, but, every few couple of weeks I'll pop in this series, and we're going to do the old legends that like Dempsey, Fitzy Zivic, like Floyd Patterson, pretty much what my students refer to as people that lived in the black and white era, because they actually believe they were in black and white, which is weird. So I want to give these guys the attention, guys, because honestly, I've been sensing throughout our comment section, throughout just social media in general, that these old legends are getting forgotten. I'll be honest with you. There's a lot of comments when I talk about the old legends. A lot of people commenting in our sections don't want to hear it. And I want to take the opportunity to give these guys the shine they deserve, because they went through, without them, boxing wouldn't be where it is today. And I think they deserve the spotlight in a 25 minute lesson that I can give possible. Now, going into this episode, guys, the reason why I also want to talk about these legends, because I kind of feel like they're getting disrespected. When people look back, with social media and having information in your pocket, people are looking at all these old names and they're not recognizing, uh, their records, and they're not giving them the proper respect that they deserve. So that's why I decided to start this series. Let me know what you guys think. Give me, guys, some legends y'all want me to talk about throughout this series, and I'll go ahead and see what I can do my research, and hopefully in future episodes I'll bring up your guy. Now, I'm talking about Sonny Liston, guys, and I'll be honest with you, I'm embarrassed. I am simply embarrassed. You know, in my opinion, Sonny is an essential pillar on the pantheon of boxing. You cannot tell the story of boxing without Sonny Liston. And me, as a boxing historian, me as somebody who has loved boxing since pretty much the day I was born to now, and I barely brought him up throughout this podcast. I am part of the problem, and I am apologizing. I'm going to do my best to give you guys his history, his clout, his what he deserves in this spotlight that I'm going to give him. Because honestly, when I was learning about Sonny Liston, even growing up as a kid, and I watched many documentaries about him growing up. I was one of those kids whose favorite movie wasn't a cartoon or a Disney movie growing up as a kid. My favorite movie was actually Glory, the Civil War movie. Tell me if you guys remember that in the comment section. That's the kind of 10, 12-year-old kid that I was. And I would watch these old sport documentaries about all these legends. And the one that I always stuck to me, that I always wanted to learn more about, was Sonny Liston. Yeah, everybody talked about Muhammad Ali, talked about the greats, Joe Louis, Dempsey, talked about all those great legends, Marciano. But for some reason, Charles Sonny the Bear Liston was kind of forgotten. And he kind of, as his career matured, he kind of went against the grain that a lot of the sports heroes were trying to put their hand in. And I'm going to explain that throughout this episode. But before I get to his boxing career, I actually want to talk about his, where he came from, because that is essential to who he was. And I'm going to be honest with you guys. Sonny Liston, guys, if I could put his life into one word, as cliche as it might sound, I'm just going to say he was a fighter. He was simply a fighter. Do you realize, he was born in 1932. Now, there's speculation that he was born in 1934. Now, I know from teaching history that a lot of areas, a lot of territories, especially in his hometown in Arkansas, in the smaller towns, they didn't keep great records. I have family members where their records weren't really kept that well because I was from a small little town from the border of Texas in the South. And I could tell you this right now, hearing that about Sonny Liston, I'm not surprised. Here is a man who grew up on a plantation, guys, in the 1930s and 1940s. Do you guys understand that? Look, Jim Crow was about 50 years old and there were still plantations. We tend to think that slavery was over, but these owners of these plantations were still keeping these, how can I put it? I guess you can say that they were still trying to hold on to the past, you know, and Sonny Liston's family was one of those families. His father had 25 children, and Sonny Liston was the 24th of the 25th. And his father treated him like garbage, overworked him, embarrassed him, beat him, worked him so hard that Sonny Liston got to the point where he was like feeling the abuse. And here is something. And now maybe you guys can help me in the comment section here. But I read this from multiple. So I remember hearing this as a kid about him, that he was actually sold to another plantation owner as a young child. Now maybe you guys can help me with that. But I remember hearing that as a kid, that he was even sold, and what does that do to you as a kid growing up? Granted, he grew up illiterate as well. He would grow, he would eventually, I wanted to save this conversation for later, but he would testify in the Senate for boxing corruption in 1960, if I'm not mistaken, as an illiterate person. So he went his entire life, not understanding how to read or write. Just goes to show you that he was just a straight up fighter. He did what he could. And when he got out of Arkansas and eventually went back to live with his mother in St. Louis, unfortunately, guys, trouble would find him. If I'm not mistaken, he got arrested 19 times. He would eventually start his career as a 6'1", 215-pound man with 14-inch fist. Now, a few episodes back, I had an episode called "The Greatest Jabs of All Time," and I was heavily criticized for it, and I love criticism, so keep them coming. That I left Sonny Liston off the top three because I had Muhammad Ali, I had um, Larry Holmes, and I had Hagler. And a lot of people were mad that I left Liston off, that I left Hearns off. I had Hearns there, but just for a different conversation, I left him off. But anyways, and I get it, guys. I get why you guys were upset that I left off Sonny Liston because that left jab that he had was unparalleled. And, most boxers, when they come in with that jab, it comes from their core, it comes from their trunk, it comes from their legs, it comes from their form, and all that is correct. But what Sonny Liston had, I'm going to come back to his boxing career in a minute, but I just want to talk about this, was that brawn of a shoulder where when he stiffed that jab out, it was going to break any guard possible. And I honestly think that is just because he was raised his entire life working that farm, plantation, burrowing life where he's just using blunt force to get the job done, even as a kid. I remember hearing, there is Jim Strong and then there is Farm Strong. And a guy from Texas, you always, football is a big thing here in Texas. And I always remember hearing, there's offensive linemen that are Farm Strong. That's the one you guys want because they have this natural, like thick grip and they're just strong. That's who Sonny Liston was. And with his size and strength and that beautiful left jab that he had, he would create a career that was unparalleled to, uh, no, pretty much not that many boxers back at that time. Now, before I get to his boxing career, I want to continue with his youth because it is very important. After he left the plantation in Arkansas, he would run away to St. Louis to go live with his mother. Unable to read and write, as I mentioned before, as a teenager, he would attempt to make a living on the streets of St. Louis. In 1950, and then about 3 years later, he would start his amateur career. He and two others were arrested for armed robbery of two gas stations and a diner. He would plead guilty on both of those counts, first degree robbery and two charges of larceny, and he was sentenced to 5 years on each charge to run concurrently. And while he was in the penitentiary of Missouri State, in Jefferson City, no, that's where he started boxing. So he started, before he became an amateur, boxing in the penitentiary. And in doing so, in October of 1952, he would be released on parole, and he would turn professional the following September. His first pro fight would last not 30 seconds, 31, 32 seconds. And he would end up wiping out completely a boxer by the name of Don Smith, with his first punch. Now, going back to his left hook, his left jab, guys, Liston was unique in the sense that, you know, as I mentioned earlier, his physique was not this stoic, 6-pack abs with 21-inch biceps, and you could grade cheese on his abs or anything like that. This guy was a farm, strong, hefty body. And as I mentioned before, while most boxers get their power from their form and their core and their butt and their legs, he got his form, in my opinion, what I think a lot of it came, as I mentioned before, from that shoulder. This is a bad comparison, but Deontay Wilder is interesting to me because people often said about Wilder that he had the greatest knockout punching power in boxing history. Y'all remember that? But if you look at his physique, even though he was chiseled, uh, looked like a Greek god, he had these skinny little legs, and people were always wondering, where is his power coming from? Well, it's coming from his back. I believe the same thing came from Sonny Liston. It was his back, it was his bronze shoulder, because that shoulder, when he would punch with that left, was sublime. It could break any guard possible. And he knew that from the get go that he had something to offer with that left jab. Now, unfortunately, guys, Liston would become like a marked man in St. Louis, where police officers were just stopping him for no apparent reason. He was getting arrested 19 times as stop traffic signs. Just walking the corner of the street, people would just start arresting him because he had a big old target on his back, having a herky jerky start to his new life career as a boxer. Now, eventually, at one point in May of 1956, in the middle of his career, a cop would confront him, and Liston would assault the officer, most likely out of frustration, breaking his knee, busting up his face, taking his gun, and Liston would receive 9 months in the city workhouse doing time. After his release, Liston would have another confrontation with the cop. This time, he left an officer headfirst in a tree, like flipped him into a trash bin. After that, they realized that Sonny Liston was a menace to the town. People said that he was a menace in the ring as well, and they would tell him to leave St. Louis. He pretty much got expelled from St. Louis. Now, for Sonny Liston, he would go to Philadelphia, and unfortunately, that's where things kind of changed for the worse, in my opinion. Eventually he was served 2 years in prison and was later under the majority ownership of Frankie Carbo and Blinky Palmero, who were top mafia figures, as Sonny Liston would fight 10 to 12 fights under them, if I'm not mistaken. I'm trying to recall. But, you know, Liston will begin working into shape with hopes of a heavyweight title shot as he continued to become had this antisocial behavior, guys. He was developing a reputation. Now, this was early on in the late 50s, 1960s. So he was, this was a delicate time in American history. I teach this in American history where civil rights were changing. And a lot of athletes, a lot of African American athletes were speaking their minds to have their piece of American freedom, get away from the Jim Crow laws, and such as Muhammad Ali, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Jim Brown. That would come a little bit later in the 1960s. But Sonny Liston was kind of the anti-figure, and there's a lot of resentment on Sonny Liston's part. This was kind of leading on to the lore, the legacy of who Sonny Liston was, on becoming this menacing figure, boogeyman figure. I consider him one of the first boogeymen of all time, in and out of the ring. And for the social aspect outside of the ring, Sonny Liston wanted nothing to do. He was kind of like the anti-hero. So much so that there is speculation that JFK even told Floyd Patterson, as Sonny Liston was trying to move up the ranks to get to that heavyweight title, JFK told Floyd Patterson, to avoid Sonny Liston, whose reputation, being as working on the streets, being working under working under mafia members, was going to go against that civil rights movement, as I mentioned before. And on the fight taking place in September 1962 and in Chicago, it lasted only 2 minutes and 6 seconds. But here's the interesting thing. Guys, when you become a heavyweight champ for the first time, your life is supposed to change. You're supposed to get that hero's greeting, going back to your hometown. This is where our champ is. This is we raised the champion here. Sonny Liston came home to none of that. People speculated that gave him this bitter sense that, what, I'm giving everything I can in the ring. Maybe he feels in a strange way that he is letting people down, but the idea that this guy, who has endured what he has in his life, you can tell that Sonny Liston was going on a revenge tour. The rematch with Patterson would take place in Vegas in 1963, where Liston would knock out Patterson again, but this time in the first round. And after defeating Floyd Patterson the second time, it was starting to begin to feel like that Sonny Liston was going to be this unbeaten guy because of that daunting left jab that he had, that relentless pursuit of that thumping left that just cracked through guards, that he was able to control boxers and knock them out early. He was essentially Tyson before Mike Tyson. Okay. Then right after that, guys, he would challenge uh Cassius Clay, aka Muhammad Ali, and is where things took things turned for the worst. He even admitted that he did not train well for Muhammad Ali. They kind of took him lightly because, if I'm mistaken, he was a 7-1 odds favorite to defeat Muhammad Ali. But what do we know about that first fight? They would go to the seventh round. And Sonny Liston seemed, in my opinion, when I rewatched that fight, that he was overwhelmed with Cassius Clay's movement, as he was a different fighter that he mostly had fought up throughout the ranks of his career. You got to realize something about Muhammad Ali. He was light on his feet. He was like a lightweight in the heavyweight division. Float like a butterfly, singing the beat. He had that flicker jab that was so essential to his career, that would bail him out of so many great clashes, that I don't think Sonny Liston had ever seen a fighter like that. And he was, in my opinion, when I see Sonny Liston fighting that first time against Cassius Clay, I think he was overextending himself. And he didn't come out of that 7th round due to that shoulder injury that he, if I'm not mistaken, he took a year off of to get surgery, to rehab, to redevelop. Now, the rematch would take place the next year in 1965. in Maine. And now there was speculation that this fight that the first fight was a fix, that it was gonna roll over into the second fight. And of course, we all know the history of that spectacular photo where Muhammad Ali knocks him out with supposedly the Phantom Punch, right? I've done entire episodes on the Phantom Punch. I've been criticized on my perspective on the Phantom Punch. I honestly believe, just like the first time they fought, that Cassius Clay, which was going by Cassius X at the time, by the time the second fight went on, and eventually Muhammad Ali, I believe that second fight, that Sonny Liston was so overwhelmed by Muhammad Ali's movement that he just did not want to deal with it anymore. And I honestly think that Phantom Punch did connect. You can see the ripples on his back as the punch did land. And I will say this about that Phantom Punch. I think, no, my old co-host Sam says that would knock him out. But that's not going to knock out a champ like a brawn of a man like Sonny Liston. And I actually agree with them. But in a sense, I think Sonny Liston hit the ground. I think it was a flash knockdown that Sonny Liston could not believe that got him down. And he was just like, you know what? I don't want to deal with this today. I've explained this a million times on this podcast. And he just stayed on the mat. As you can see him rolling down on the mat, kind of confused, kind of in a weird way, just playing on the mattress. That's the vibe I got. You guys tell me in the comments. And Sonny Liston just never got up, you know, and he would just roll over, climb on his knees, and then fall again. You know, it's always been a mystery about the Phantom Punch, the one that floored Liston. One of Liston's assistant trainers said that Liston threw the fight in fear of being murdered by black Muslims that Muhammad Ali had a lot of influence over. And it was later on admitted that Sonny Liston did fear for his life and that he purposely threw the fight. You know, he would take another year off, unfortunately, start fighting in Sweden or Switzerland, if I'm mistaken. I think he fought a few fights there. And he was making his comeback. He comes back to America, making his comeback, and eventually, you know, tried to get his chance to come back for a heavyweight title before losing to the likes of Leotis Martin, getting knocked out in the ninth round, ruining his chance at a heavyweight title and making his comeback. After that, he'll fight the famed Rocky inspiration Chuck Wepner, knock out Chuck Wepner in the ninth round, making him retire in that ninth round. And the rest of his boxing career would be over, guys. And look, you know, in about a 25 minute episode, this is the gist of what I can put into him. But I'll say this. Unfortunately, 7 months later, he would die. His wife, Geraldine, I think if she was on a 2 or 3 week vacation, if I'm not mistaken, she would come back to their home, open the door, and it would reek of pretty much death, because that's exactly what it was. She would go into the bedroom and she would see Liston lunged over on the bed in a compromising position, looking like he was struggling for his life. And there is speculation that he died of heart disease, heroin overdose. I mean, I know he did have issues with drugs, especially with heroin. They did find, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the coroner did find heroin in his system. But for a lot of people, they believe that there was no way that it could have been a suicide or an overdose, because Sonny Liston was afraid of needles and that he would never do such a thing. That he had some tie-up issues with the mafia, and they came to collect as they believed that it was mob related to his murder. And whether he was murdered by mafia or not, it's a shame that he went out the way he did. I think he had a lot more to give to the boxing world. I think he had a lot more because despite being abused as a young kid and coming up, in the wrong, being influenced by wrong people with the mafia and in St. Louis and everything, he was always given a raw deal, in my opinion. Yeah, was that self-inflicted? Maybe. And at a certain time, you got to take responsibility for yourself. I understand that. But for Sonny Liston, it just always seemed like the way he died, the way he passed away, people were expecting that to come from him. That was the way he was going to go, whether it was by heroin overdose or mafia related. I remember hearing stories that people were just not surprised on how he went out. And whether both are true or if it was heart disease or not, for Sonny Liston, he is a legend in boxing, guys. He needs to never be forgotten because, like I mentioned at the start of this, he is an essential pillar to the boxing world. The story of boxing cannot be told without the story of Sonny Liston. To me, he is a fighter from birth to death. And I just wish he had a better ending to his story. I'm going to go ahead and leave it here, guys. I know I left a lot out. Go ahead, leave a comment in the section. Give me some legends you want me to talk about that you guys feel that is being forgotten or being disrespected, and I'll do a never forgotten episode on them soon. Please go ahead and like and subscribe, and don't forget to stick and move, baby.
I am the greatest. I wish I was 50 years younger and I'd kick your ass.
You won't do shit. Just stick and move. And waking you up and